Gut, dann übergebe ich gerne Billy Meyer und will ganz kurz einfach sagen, Billy ist, jetzt stehe ich hier immer jemandem vor der Nase. Billy ist seit mehreren Jahren selbstständig mit dem Sprachraum Meyer, heißt das, ne, das du leitest, ein eigenes Beratungsgeschäft. Er ist ausgebildeter Mediator und Supervisor und hat sich bereit erklärt, heute hier dieses Podium oder jetzt eher diesen Rundkreis zu moderieren. Vielen Dank, Billy.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. First, I want to ask the time question. We have set 7 o'clock. Is it okay for everybody if we go on 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or has somebody to leave on the dot? Nobody. Excellent. Okay. We had a little meeting before. We had to have this panel, and I asked him, what is your aim for this panel? And Jay said, and I think he spoke for everybody, that we can connect. And what does it require to connect with other people? It does require to connect with yourself. And if we can connect to ourselves and be connected to the experts and to the field, I think, what more can we ask? And therefore, I would like to say to you that the panel is really eager to hear your questions, your explorations, and your detections. Where do you want to go and what do you want to learn? I am very pleased to have these experts here on board tonight, and to make it a little bit more simple, we have 3 faces. It's Heinz. They will introduce themselves afterwards. Heinz, it's before a violent conflict. J stands for during interventions and during violent conflicts, and David stands for after. We will soon realize that this is pinpointed, and it goes one to the other, also what interventions are concerned. So I would just give you a quick overview and then I stop talking. What will happen tonight? First, the panelists, they will each have about 8 minutes to introduce who they are and what they do, their organizations, but also how their work is also linked maybe to their own biography. They will present themselves and the work they do. Then I asked them beforehand to think about questions for the other panelists. So when they had their presentations, they will each ask the other person a questions from their field, but a question which will help them to understand their own field better. And then we go from there. Okay? So, Heinz, I start with before. Heinz Krummenacher, it's your floor.
Thank you, Billy. Yeah, I want to share a little bit of my biography with you. For some of you, it will be helpful to understand what has been going on in Swiss foreign and especially Swiss security and peace policy during the past 25 years. And it also explains my interest in the field, why I'm particularly interested in preventing violence and preventing violent conflicts before they start. I'm one of 3 directors of Swiss Peace, the Swiss Peace Foundation. We had 2 directors, Laurent Götschel and myself, and now we went through a reorganization process last year, and we thought after 20 years of male dominance, we should have a female member in the directorate as well. So it's we share this position now with Anita Müller, who was formerly head of the Center for Peace Building of the Swiss Peace Foundation, the KOF Center. Now let me go back a little bit, 25 years, when I finished high school. There I had studied primarily political science, Ted Gurr and this relative deprivation theory and things like that, Ed Azar, who had developed the event data-based analysis. And then after I finished with my doctorate, I decided to join the Swiss military department. Not particularly because I had the ideal haircut, but because they had a project called comprehensive risk analysis, which meant that they didn't want to look at security policy just from a military point of view, but they wanted, apparently, that was my interpretation, look at the other factors that had an impact on Swiss security, like economic issues or even environmental aspects or social aspects. And I was then head of a study group whose task was to redefine Swiss national security policy. For me, it was quite clear that even before the fall of the Berlin Wall, the new Swiss security policy should not be built upon a strong army, that we should, instead of trying to improve our defense structures, that we should improve our foreign relations, that we should do peace-building work, especially in Africa and elsewhere, because at the end of the day, what happened far back in Turkey or in the Balkans or in Africa would also affect our position here in Switzerland. Even in about 22 years ago, I gave a speech on the Lenzberg, and the topic was security policy and climate change. And I tried to explain why we focus so much on military threats, and which even at that time were not very obvious, because we were surrounded by friends. But still, we focused very much on military threats and not on other issues, like, for example, climate change. And I tried to explain why this was, and it actually still is today. And my theory is that, the causal link between military, a foreign army standing at the boundary and being threatened by this army, this causal link is so obvious. Whereas in climate change or in environmental issues or even migration or things that happen in the Balkans, the causal link between what has happened in Kosovo and what it would produce here in Switzerland, that was not obvious. And this is one of the major issues, one of the major reasons why we are so much focused on this military threat. And it helps us also to reduce complexity, as Uli has pointed out. It's so much easier to reduce this complexity when you have so very obvious causal links between an army or Russian tanks sitting somewhere in Poland at that time. Anyway, I thought, I'm still fine. I really thought, being pretty young at the time, I thought that with good arguments I would be able to have an impact and change the Swiss policy of national defense. And I produced papers and papers for the Federal Council. Later on, I moved to Zurich to be part of Professor Spielmann's team, who had been appointed as a professor for peace politics in Zurich. And I produced papers and papers, and nobody would listen to me, and those papers disappeared in some drawers within the federal bureaucracy. But every once in a while, in the parliament, somebody would ask the question. Obviously, military threats are not the biggest threats nowadays, but we should look at economic issues, or like Gary Miller has pointed out, the energy question. And then this was the only time the Federal Council would say, well, we are aware of that, we even have a study group that is dealing with that. And that was it, that was my function. I not only thought that we should broaden the concept of security, I also thought that we needed a change in paradigm, that we needed to achieve security by building confidence instead of building an army. But that was way out of most of the people at that time, and even as I alluded to in my previous statement, even today sometimes I have a feeling that people still haven't understood that the old days are gone, and that Switzerland doesn't need a strong army and doesn't need bomber fighters, but needs to prove itself a useful country in the world. And that's the best strategy to produce security for us. We don't have a strategy in Switzerland. What we have is, whenever a new problem arises, the Federal Council would nominate a what they call it, a task force. That's task force is a synonymous for lack of strategy in Switzerland. I think that's the case in many countries, and what I'm saying is basically we are in the peace building area, we are still at the very beginning of a hopefully good development towards a modern concept of and policy of security and peace that takes into account that we are living in a globalized world.
And where you're working now is part of this.
Well, I'm getting to that. I'm now, since I have taken over the director of a project called Before. Before is a joint project of Swiss Peace and the Alliance for Peace Building in the United States, and we have developed this theoretical approach to peace building together with some well-renowned international or basically American experts like Michael Lund or Peter Woodrow. And we have come up with a 10-step approach to consolidate peace in fragile states. And it starts with choosing the country where you want to intervene, and it goes via sending an assessment team, always not an assessment team to verify the situation there, not by Western experts. We always look at an international perspective from outside, and a perspective from inside by locals. So our bodies that we have a global advisory board, we have a regional advisory committee for West Africa. This board is always comprised of international experts and local experts. So this is something very, very important. So we choose a country in this pilot region, West Africa. It's done by those experts, and they choose the country based on two criteria. First criteria is is the country at risk? Is it not already at war? Because then countries that already experience large-scale violence, they are not of interest to us because we want to interfere before it happens. Then, and that's our philosophy, then we can have an impact. With relatively little means, you can achieve a lot in such a situation, and we're doing this right now in Guinea-Conakry, in Guinea-Bissau, with more, at the time, probably more success in Conakry than in Bissau. But then we follow this 10-step approach. After we sent the assessment team to verify the situation and find out whether we actually can have an impact on the situation there, a positive impact, then we do a multi-stakeholder workshop with all local stakeholders involved. In Conakry, there were 51 people assembled in a hotel room, and they did a marvelous conflict analysis themselves. They came up with an action plan, what to do, and what we did, that's our philosophy. We don't do the work for them. They have to do it themselves, and we support the process. That's all we do. So, and then we help to find the necessary funds to actually implement the activities that are suggested. So what we did in Guinea, first thing, the most important thing they said is do a study on the defense and security structures. They didn't want to mention it or call it security sector reform for a variety of internal reasons. So we commissioned a retired general from Senegal to do such an assessment, and he came up with 19 recommendations how to reform the security sector. And this was picked up by ECOWAS, and they said, well, okay, let's now also include the judiciary system and not only focus on the military and the defense or the security sector. We triggered something. We had a kind of a catalytic function because the process went on, and now the EU is actually considering implementing a security sector reform in Guinea. I'm not saying that it wouldn't have happened at all if we would not have done this initial step, but it would have taken much longer, I'm sure. And so we have this action plan. We have a local comité de pilotage that's overseeing the action plan, what we're doing, what we need to change, and then we discuss this with them, and we adapt the action plan to changing circumstances.
So you are on the field as well, or you just organizing this?
Well, you need to be there. I mean, you cannot organize this out of Bern or Washington. You have to be there. And also for psychological reasons. We are not only on the grassroots level, we try to be on all levels, working with local NGOs, wanting to work also with private business, but also the government and the military. And the most important thing I think is going back there, showing interest, asking them, okay, how is it going? What needs to be changed? Is our action plan on the spot, or do we have to implement something else? The most important thing is to see the happy faces, the happiness that comes, that they see, oh, he's coming back. Obviously, they actually care about what's going on here in Guinea, because all too often you have teams of experts parachuting in and doing a study, doing a training, and then going back to their capitals, and they are never seen again. So there is also a psychological aspect to that. One other very important step in this 10-step approach is to look what other organizations are doing and linking with them. There's no use of doing something that's already been done by some other organization. We can actually maybe help them, provide some funding for them, but we won't do it if somebody else is doing it. And so it's a we try to informally coordinate a process in a country. We don't have, obviously, we don't have the necessary power, the authority to coordinate the process. But informally, we can do. It's very hard. This is one of the most difficult things to do. I mentioned the security sector reform. Once the EU has taken over, it's very hard for me to even get the basic information from them, because the consultant would say, well, I cannot share the information I just gathered in Conakry, because if I share it with you, I have to share it with all other NGOs, because at the end of the day, there will be a call for proposals, and if I give you this information, you have an advantage over the others. So it gets really, really difficult once the EU or the UN comes into the picture.
Can you share with us one critical point you experienced in this 10-point plan in the example you just stated, for you personally?
Well, there are two really crucial points, I think. One I just mentioned, to stay in the loop once you have triggered something, and always monitor what's going on. And the second, or maybe the first, it's actually the first point, is to choose the right partners on the ground. If you don't have the right people, then you can have the best concepts. It won't lead you anywhere, because you're dependent. You're so much dependent on the local collaborators.
And how important is the personal relationship?
Oh, that's very, very important. As I already mentioned, simply the fact that you go back there on a regular basis. I mean, we have email contact on a daily basis, but Guinea now has had elections, and those people also have different hats and different tasks. So in such a period where they are really preoccupied with the elections, it's kind of hard to get information from them that you need in order to implement the action plan that you have or that they have developed.
And can you come to the point where you can say this was successful, we withdraw now, or we monitor, or we don't have the contact as we used to?
Well, right now there is so much talking, so many conferences on measuring impact all over the world, and I'm getting to the conclusion. I'm not quite there yet, but it seems that I'm going to get there pretty soon. I think we cannot measure success whether we actually had an impact on peace, as Peter Woodrow says, peace writ large, on the overall peace situation. I'm going down some levels, and my criteria for success is: have we been able to create structures, to put, when I say structures, I mean networks of people who, even if there is a setback, could pick up the work later on again once the situation gets more favorable. I think this is something we really have to think about. It's more the structures that we create, and the possibility to continue the effort even if there is a breakdown. In Guinea, there are 1,000 reasons why there could be a situation where you think, well, everything's lost. But if you have people there, networks, all over the country, that if the situation presents itself more favorable, then they could continue again, and I think that would be a success.
Thank you very much, Heinz. we gave Heinz a little bit more time also, because he won't have a workshop here, so you have a little bit an impression of his work. And I'm pretty sure you will, afterwards, you can share the website or where the people can get more information. So Jay, it's very tempting to have as much time, but I ask you to, to try to stick to the 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
Well, it's very nice to start this week with you now. And picking up from Heinz and the whole point of us connecting, it seems that we share teachers. My teacher was Ed Azar. So we share a basic theory about the need to link good theory to good practice, I imagine. Another major piece that I think Ed Azar taught so many of us is if we're going to be involved in peace, we also have to be involved in development. That is, if we bifurcate these two speakers we had before, Gary and Ule, and maybe caricature them a little bit. Gary talked about resources. We have to pay attention to resources. At the end of Ule's talk, he said we have to pay attention to reasons. Right? So you could say a dialectical suggestion would be we pay attention to resources as peace workers, or we pay attention to reasons for people's needs, people's values. And Ed Azar would say we pay attention to both. And I imagine Galtung also would say that dichotomy needs to be bridged, where we go back and forth and link what resources are being undermined by people's sense of being themselves threatened or frustrated in their needs, and in what ways those threatened and frustrated needs lead to a misuse and abuse of resources. I also want to pick up, though, on the notion of biography as a way of talking about why we do the work that we do. And with Heinz speaking about the Swiss dilemma of identifying who you are here, let me take it a little bit more personal and give you a little quick bio of myself. I began this work at age 7. I think many of us can find such roots when my kindergarten teacher invited me to bring peace among my warring colleagues, and informs me now, 30 years later, as I interviewed her, that I did very well at basically asking them, what's going on with you? Why are we fighting? And those simple questions of why are we fighting continues to be the main point of my work. So much of the work is really oftentimes about what do we want to do that's important, and how are we going to do it in ways that are effective. The core of my work has always been, why do we care? Really about the reasons for engaging this work that meets our needs and helps us to fulfill those interests that we have. But as I go up through the age of 7 into my teens, I grew up in the 60s. And in America in the 60s, it was really about the black-white struggle. In many ways about the black struggle against the whites, and in many ways the white struggle against their own dominance, and trying to figure out how in the United States to become a more truly nation of nations, which is, if America's great, is probably its one mark of greatness. That it's a nation that in fact has been built of many nations, and its major impediment to that was indeed slavery and the inability to figure out how to invite blacks to be equal participants in framing and reframing the purpose of our country. So that really was my purpose, which was working in that civil rights movement. And in college, I went to the Martin Luther King Center in Georgia and found my way into becoming a nonviolent social activist. After college, found myself an activist, and then found myself very tired of activism because I began to find it being polarizing. As I was finding its polarization adding more to the confrontation instead of to some resolution of that confrontation or more discovery about how to make that confrontation creative, I saw a little teeny advertisement in the New York Times for the first conflict resolution program in the world, starting at George Mason University. Not peace science, which had started probably at Bradford and other parts, but truly a program built largely off of John Burton's notions of human needs, which were of course connected with Galtung's notions. So I got myself into that program in 1981 and began to have a new name for myself. No longer a nonviolent social activist, but now a conflict resolver. I then transferred from George Mason over to the University of Maryland to work with Ed Azar, and John Burton was there as well. And one of the big dilemmas that they were working with as they were developing their methods, method of international problem solving, to try to deal with the underlying conditions and concerns of communities in conflict, not only between states but within states, was how do we define and determine success? Same dilemma that Heinz was talking about. And they had, unfortunately, an answer that as academics, we can be academic, but as practitioners, we can't really deal with that issue because it will violate the parties that we're working with. So they made a bifurcation. And my work then, as a graduate student, was, of course, to one-up my teachers. That's what you're supposed to do. So I thought that it was possible to do both and, which was to intervene in conflict and also evaluate our success of those interventions as part of the intervention itself. And over the years, that has turned into a methodology that I'll be talking about in depth tomorrow and training some of you over the few days about how we use explorations of success to create success. With the key question being, why do I care? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to me? And I've now worked with this approach in projects very large and very small, from Cincinnati in 2001 after the riots, where we asked thousands of people, why do you care? Why did you riot? Why did you resist the riots? What is the future that you're trying to accomplish? Last week in Moldova, we asked a group of participants between Moldova and Transnistria, what are you here for? Why does it matter to you? Week before that, we asked kids from Northern Ireland, South Africa, the Middle East, and Muslims, Christians, and Jews the same question. What are your goals in life? And why do you care so deeply about those goals? And the startling thing is when people talk about why they care so deeply about their goals, they begin to discover differences that are interesting and overlapping purposes that I find to be passionate. So, how am I doing? 2 minutes. So I have two institutions, and I agree also with Heinz that one of the marks of success is that we're able to institutionalize this work. And it's very exciting to see Switzerland at the start of that, and to see ICP as being a part of that effort to institutionalize peace-seeking, peace-building. So my two institutions are, one is a practical consulting company that works as a consultant, as consultants to businesses, to organizations and communities when they're facing deep conflict from the past or they're seeking to build new futures together in a cooperative way. But I also have an academic position at the University of Cincinnati so that I can go back and forth from the field to the studies and keep trying to see academic practice, academic research rather, as a way to improve field work, and to continue to ask in my field work, how can I do better in terms of theory and sharing with